Hey everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods, wrapping up a kind of busy week here, and so I thought I'd just do a quick video to recap some of what's happened in the last few days, and also some of what I think comes next for us at 198 Methods. I got a couple of little slides here, and I'll sort of talk you through it so you know what we're talking about. Okay, so first thing to say is that after several months of working on it, unfortunately, the Senate did vote to confirm Bernard McNamee to be the new commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. The vote was 50-49, and it was exactly on party line votes. Every Republican, except for Tom Tillis, who was absent, voted yes to confirm McNamee, and every Democrat, including Joe Manchin, who had voted for McNamee in committee, voted nay. And we'll come back to why that's important in just a second. But we should first say, that this is basically just bad news. McNamee, of course, was Trump's climate-denying nominee to FERC. He was the architect of a plan to subsidize coal and nuclear power to the tune of $34 billion with a B. And so on ratepayers, that ratepayers would pay that money. So his confirmation to FERC is not a good thing, and will definitely imperil the climate and clean energy, and set us up for a position where a guy who wrote a plan that FERC voted 5-0 to oppose, he will now be in a position to be one of the 5 votes on, should that same idea get proposed again soon. So that is not the good news. But like I said, the content of that vote is important, or the how of the vote is important. And also think some of the work we've done on it is worth touching on or explaining a little bit. So just to explain that a little bit more, 49 senators did not vote for anything ever, but especially have never banded together to vote on climate change. So we went back and checked the record. 49 Democrats did not vote against Scott Pruitt to be the EPA administrator. Pruitt later had to resign in a cloud of scandal and was horrible on climate change. But Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp voted for him anyway about a year ago this time. Same deal on Rex Tillerson. He was the former head of ExxonMobil. We were literally putting the oil industry in charge of the State Department and in charge of U.S. foreign policy. And a number of Democrats actually voted for Rex Tillerson to be Secretary of State. So the part where we got every single Democrat in the Senate to line up, I think the post I put up about it earlier was, we've done the impossible, and that is actually not an exaggeration. Getting 49 Democrats to line up and vote not just against a Donald Trump nominee, that is historic, never happened before, but getting them to do it because climate change. Even Joe Manchin specifically cited climate change as the reason he was voting against McNamee on the floor. It's weird, and it doesn't make me trust Joe Manchin more. We'll come back to that more in a minute, but it is worth noting that was a singular moment when, after years of lobbying on lots of other things that might have seemed more consequential, like Tillerson and Pruitt, this was the one time we got every Democrat to stand in a line and say no to a Trump nominee because climate change was a superseding issue. It's also worth just mentioning, this was not an accident. It came at the end of a really long campaign. You may remember we were there just on Monday, lobbying outside, lobbying Senator Schumer's office. This is the video report back from right after our lobby meeting with Senator Schumer's office. Nor was that the only time we had been there talking to senators about this. This is the video from one of McNamee's confirmation hearings where we stood up and spoke out. There were a bunch of different examples where we had gone throughout the last couple of months to protest, to lobby. We'd sent over 30,000 letters and signatures to the Senate opposing McNamee. And the vote on Wednesday was just sort of the culmination of a lot of that stuff. Great work to everybody. And thanks for all the hard work opposing this nominee. We didn't get the result we wanted, but we got a lot more votes in favor than we might have if we hadn't done all of that work. The other thing to say is sort of where we go next here. And so a couple notes on that. The first is just about McNamee and FERC. One important thing is that we have heard that the gentleman who had been the chairman before, was originally appointed as chairman, Kevin McIntyre is his name, has been unwell and has actually missed a couple of FERC meetings. And while we don't wish him any kind of ill health, this is not a happy news for him. There is a rumor that he will step down from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission somewhere in the next few months, and that's part of why they had expedited McNamee's hearing process in particular. And so it may be that, well, McNamee is sort of the worst FERC nominee we've ever seen, that actually him getting appointed won't be that bad in terms of the balance at FERC, because if another Republican commissioner retires, McIntyre's another Republican, we'd be back to this 2-2 position. And McNamee, because he's been so outspoken in favor of fossil fuels and because of all his work lobbying on behalf of fossil fuel companies and working at the Department of Energy with fossil fuel companies, he may actually need to recuse himself or be sort of barred from a lot of decisions. And so we could actually end up with a scenario where either FERC is still just deadlocked with 2 Democrats voting against 2 Republicans. That dynamic we've talked about as sort of desirable gridlock at FERC, or even a place where if McNamee does recuse himself, that we'd actually have a 2 Democrat majority voting against the 1 remaining Republican, Neil Chatterjee. So you could actually be in a position where we'd be able to outvote or have some folks who acknowledge the basic science on climate change outvote climate deniers at FERC. So lots more to come on this. It's definitely not good that McNamee was confirmed, but it may not be that bad either if McIntyre does step down as we expect, and if the 2 Democrats who remain continue to step up and push climate issues. The other thing that is, wrapped up in all this that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention is Joe Manchin. I mentioned him. He did vote eventually on the floor against McNamee, which was a surprise because he was the only Democrat on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee who had voted for McNamee in committee. We believe this is part of this scheme or sort of bigger plan for Democrats to name Manchin to be the top Democrat on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. We've talked a bunch about this in some previous videos, so I'll point you back in the comments to earlier things that we've posted or recorded about this. But the basic deal is it looks like Manchin was attempting to burnish his climate bona fides. Like I said, he did specifically cite climate action as the reason he was opposed to McNamee on the floor. And he had talked about climate change somewhat unusually. So that all is worth noting, and we'll continue to fight to make sure Manchin does not become the ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee in the Senate after January, when the reshuffling takes place. Some Democrats are leaving because they lost their elections. Some new Republicans are elected, and that causes all of the committee assignments to kind of get shuffled around a little bit. And we just want to make sure that this climate denying, bad, coal supporting Democrat is not given a position of power and priority over other Democrats on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So that's Joe Manchin. And then the last thing that's kind of connected to all this is the Sunrise action that's coming up on Monday, the 10th. This is supporting their call for a Green New Deal. I mentioned it because on Monday, when we were lobbying Senator Schumer's office and other Democratic senators, we had kind of a 3-part demand. One was that the Democrats all stand together and vote no on McNamee. Check, we got that, mission accomplished. Second was that we could not allow Joe Manchin to be elevated to be the lead Democrat on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. That's in process, but it does appear, by his vote on McNamee, that he's at least aware of our demands and that they're trying to come up with a decent answer to our question. And then the third thing we were lobbying about was the Green New Deal, what Sunrise is lobbying on as well on Monday. So we'll put a link in the comments to where you can sign up to come with them on Monday the 10th to DC if you want, or to San Francisco to Nancy Pelosi's office in California to lobby there. And there's also options to do things in your home congressional districts if you want. They're also asking for help supporting travel and logistical costs for their organizers on Sunday night and Monday, so they can get everybody trained to go in and do kind of a massive office occupation similar to what this video is them confronting Representative Pallone in his office about the Green New Deal. So we're in coordination with them. We're in support of all the work they're doing on the Green New Deal, and we'll have more updates on that coming on Monday. And then the last thing I want to just kind of update you on is to give you a little background on why I think this kind of connects back to all of our work and where this is going with 198 methods. So the first thing is, the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks have really shown us since the election, there's been this surge in tactics that kind of combine direct action, digital media, and pressure on the incoming and now democratically controlled House of Representatives. And I think that's going to be a big theme of 2019. And it also is like what we do here at 190 Methods. So it's kind of perfect for us. And so we see this as a real time where we can be of use and of service to the movements. If you look at what was happening with those sunrise actions, lots of people taking over an office, live streaming it. That's exactly the kind of tactic that we've been supporting for many years, but especially since 198 was started about a year and a little bit ago. That's been kind of our bread and butter main thing that we do, is digitally supported office occupations. We did the office occupation of Governor Cooper's office in North Carolina. We've done a bunch of actions related to FERC and related things, live streaming from the street outside when we shut down FERC, the main driveway entrance to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We've done, one of our first actions a little over a year ago was we went to Senator Schumer's office when they were considering another packet of FERC nominees, and I was arrested along with a bunch of friends from New York, protesting the idea that Democrats weren't uniting in opposition to FERC nominees. So in some ways you'd say, it worked, just didn't work the first time, but it worked this time. And so it does seem like that style of campaigning, that tactic will continue to be useful. And we really want to keep having the resources to show up and support our friends wherever they are, doing this kind of actions in DC or in home districts or in different governor's offices. The second thing to note is just that the reason why you're seeing so much focus and attention on the Congress, whether it's the Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives, is because this is actually the first time in about 10 years where we've had people to fight with about where we're going to go. Since the 2010 midterms, when the Republicans swept into power, it has not been possible to advance progressive legislation like a Green New Deal. And it hasn't really been that credible of a threat to go to Democrats and say, you all need to hang together as a bloc and work together as a caucus or as a party to advance interests on climate change. And now that the House at least is going to be in Democratic control, all of that messaging is actually much more pertinent. And for young people from Sunrise, this is literally the first time in their lives that that's been true, where you could walk into your member of Congress's office and say, vote yes on a Green New Deal. And there might actually be a Green New Deal plan for them to vote for, and that it could, get out of committee, it could get consideration. So this really is an important moment for us to step up, keep the pressure on Democrats in particular to lead on these issues, that the Republican Party has always been a little bit more laggard on them, but just in general to use the legislative branch as a vehicle. And that's a big change from the last 10 years or so, where it's mostly been the executive branch under Obama. And then since Trump was elected, of course, it's really just been about outright resistance, stopping everything, resisting everything coming from any branch of government. And this is a different kind of moment. We can actually be for things, for a change. And we can also use those same kind of resistance tactics, the big marches and mobilizations and protests and office visits, as a way to compel different kinds of action from elected leaders. So that's really important to bring up. And then the last thing is, we don't want to, in all the focus on federal government and the incoming Congress, which is really important, we don't want to lose sight of all of our local fights and struggles. So our friends from the Bayou Bridge pipeline fight in Louisiana were back in court this week, trying to get restitution for landowners. The court did not substantively side with them, did find that the pipeline company had broken the law by building on people's lands without permission, but they basically only awarded the landowners like $150 in restitution, and meanwhile are fining water protectors thousands of dollars for having stood on land with permission from the landowners to say, stop building this pipeline, you're breaking the law. So the quest for justice in Louisiana goes on, but so does the fight against that pipeline. We don't want to lose that struggle, even though it doesn't have a lot to do with the Congress and federal regulation. Likewise, our allies in North Carolina who are fighting the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and in Virginia fighting both the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley Pipeline. Those struggles are going on, even though FERC has mostly ruled on those. Construction is beginning to move into North Carolina on the ACP. And there's lots of important work to be done, pressuring the governors of Virginia and North Carolina, who both happen to be Democrats, by the way, to live up to their commitments on climate change by refusing these pipelines and doing more to work with local communities to object to fossil fuel infrastructure. And there's just tons more stuff to do local resolutions trying to prevent the Trump administration, which is moving ahead with offshore drilling. That was one of our big fights of last year, opposing the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Department of Interior's plan to open up all of our coast to offshore drilling. Now those are moving forward with new orders in just the last few weeks to begin seismic blasting or testing, looking for oil reserves off the coasts in the Atlantic. And so there's lots of work to be done locally to resist that, to stop boats from going out. And all of this, as you can guess, is leading up to it's December month. We would love your support to help us continue to do the kind of work you saw with the McNamee fight, going to DC, lobbying senators, doing direct action campaigns in their offices to try and get the Democrats to vote as a bloc, which we were successful on, though we weren't successful on stopping the nomination ultimately. We need to be able to do more of that. So we need your support for travel, for logistical costs, to work with partner groups like Beyond Extreme Energy on these things. And we'd also like to expand on the local level to do new kinds of campaigning. We need to be able to get out on the water in some places in North Carolina and in Virginia to stop drilling from crossing waterways. All the work off the coast obviously will require aquatic acrobatics as well. And we'd love your support so that we can continue to engage in all these fights and bring our style of digitally supported direct action to more places. We'll have more for you next week on some of our plans for 2019, but I want to just give you a preview and say that we're going to link this to a donate page in the comments where you can chip in to support what we're doing. So that's the recap. I thought it would be faster to say it than to write it. I don't know if that actually worked out, but there it all is. The week with McNamee, the Green New Deal, Joe Manchin, and then a lot of stuff coming up in later this month and into 2019 from all of us at 198 Methods. I'm Drew. Thanks. We'll see you soon.